You've got various types of games nowadays, from cinematic story-driven games that prioritise the narrative and being more of an experience. Other genres offer different aspects as their core appeal, like looter shooters promise loot to grind for and provide you with that sense of achievement. RPGs like Pokemon prey on a similar desire to grind and collect. Open world adventure games offer huge sprawling worlds with secrets to uncover and places to explore. All these different experiences, yet it feels rare when a game releases and promises a priority on the gameplay. I'm not making this out to be a bad thing. Most games control well enough and they work to put you in the world of that game, and to most people that's what games are. A means to go to a new world and explore things that you would never have been exposed to previously. So before I start sounding like a commercial, action games. Action games have the highest density of gameplay oriented games than any other genre. I'd assume, please don't hold me to that. Under this broad genre exist games that offer a high skill ceiling, having gameplay well thought out enough and that offers tools for players to just keep improving. It's not about getting weapons with higher stats. It's about improving how you play that makes you better. Skill-based games like this have the downside to appear really intimidating to casual gamers, or just people who have never played that game before. However, on the upside, those who do choose to get into them most likely really get into them. If it's just the gameplay that's good, I know I'd just keep coming back. There would be no need to release more content because the core appeal is just playing and getting better at it. I feel like gameplay games are way more likely to be played and then repeated more than, say, story-driven games. But for this to work, the gameplay actually needs to be fun and engaging in the first place. Tough luck there, Pokemon. That was a joke, by the way. I do apologise, that was such a roundabout intro. But point being, skill-based experiences mostly congregate under the action tag, and in the broader scope of gaming as a whole, games that have their core appeal be solely gameplay feel pretty uncommon. But how does one achieve a good combat system, I hear you ask? Well, I think a game that outlines the core principles very well is Ubisoft's For Honor. Before we go any further, I would like to state that while I will be using For Honor as the main point of discussion, the principles outlined can apply to any type of action game that looks to create a skill-based experience. Part 1. Be simple, yet deep. And no, that's not a riddle. The core fundamentals of For Honor are very simple. 2 types of attack, a dodge and a guard break. All things you can very easily get to grips with, but start combining them and you can start pulling off a lot more, with there being a lot of variety in the complexity of moves you can pull off. As you start to get more familiar with these starting concepts and practice more, you'll be able to pull off more complex attacks like dodge attacks, zone attacks or a bash, etc. For Honor has a very varied cast of characters with varying degrees of complexity, as well as each individual character offering a variety of moves that combine these base principles. Expanding on this point, if you're familiar enough with a particular character to be able to pull off those moves, you can take those core principles and perform mix-ups. A combination of all previously stated concepts, allowing you to pull off different chains of attacks, which heavily vary in complexity. The most experienced player will likely be able to pull off insane mix-up, knowing exactly what to perform and when, while the less experienced player is more likely to not do that. Like me, that's me. So simplicity in that the core is easy enough to get to grips with and turn second nature, but deep, in that these simple elements can be heavily expanded upon to whatever degree the player is comfortable with. Part 2. Achievement, reward. Basically, you pull something off, you get rewarded accordingly. The harder something is to pull off, the greater the reward. In this case, pulling off moves with varying complexity will reward you with varying levels of damage being inflicted to the enemy. Equally, if you mess up, the punishment will be dealt accordingly. This is one of the most essential aspects to nail in any given combat system if you want it to be engaging, and really which developer wouldn't want it to be. If everything was random, the player wouldn't feel like they need to input as much. They'll get bored and leave. Equally, if everything, regardless of complexity, rewarded the player the exact same, there'd be no point doing more than the bare minimum, and they'd get bored and leave. It's easier to spot OP characters with an imbalance of this principle. If something feels unfair, it's most likely because the player is too heavily rewarded for something so easily. Also, do you ever get the feeling that you've been cheated after being killed, even if you know for sure the person that killed you was playing fairly? It's most likely because the enemy used minimal effort and was rewarded with you as a kill seemingly too easily. So there's your culprit. And no, I'm not trying to justify me being bad, I know. Part 3. Limitations. The basic idea of this point is having boundaries that the player can come to grips with. As well as this, it also streamlines the gameplay and funnels the player into playing the game correctly or as the developers intended. Lastly, limitations force the player to get more creative with what they've got. And linking this to an earlier point, this is essential when ensuring the player doesn't get bored easily. They can't just do whatever they want. Limitations in For Honor come in the form of stamina, the length of time each attack takes, and the mere fact your enemy has the exact same tools as you do. Working within the confines of these limitations forces you to create very creative mix-ups. You can't just spam the same attacks, as you'll become predictable and easily countered. Equally, you can't just carelessly throw special moves around as you'll drain your stamina, and /or risk getting parried and lose. So each time you approach someone, your mix-up needs to be unique, stamina conscious, and directly counter what your enemy is doing. Sounds like a lot, doesn't it? So why doesn't this drag you down? Well, because it forces you to think outside the box, and that sort of creative and strategic thinking can be very engaging when done on the fly. And if you're having to think tactically, you're engaged. And if you're engaged, you're having fun. So in a sense, the more you have to think tactically, the more fun you'll have. And so the longer you'll play. And getting the player into a culture of doing this is only possible with limitations. So if you combine these aspects, you'll end up with a highly engaging combat system with a pretty high skill ceiling. A combat system like this will lead to a much more replayable game regardless if any new content is added. Players will still return to improve their skills at the game or just enjoy the moment-to-moment gameplay. With story-heavy games or adventure games, you only experience the twists in the story or discover secrets once, which may mean that some players won't even feel compelled to play a game. With a gameplay-focused game, with a strong combat system, some players will keep returning for a very long time, so I'd say it's pretty beneficial. Putting this tri-principle combat system perfection recipe, I don't think that's going to catch on, to good use, let's apply it to another game. I swear this is just another coincidence. I don't know, it just lets itself in. Now I said I wouldn't talk about this game anymore, but while we're here, Doom Eternal gives the player tools in the form of equipment launcher, dashing, and shooting. This game teaches you to weapon switch, as certain demons require the use of certain weapons, and so this is heavily encouraged. If you can get the hang of using these pieces of equipment and core principles, you can start doing things like weapon switching. Like using the infamous SSG Ballista combo, that I still use way too much. But hey, what do you expect? I'm stuck with a controller. There are other things like abusing the staggering capabilities of the grenade to keep super heavy demons pinned. And just like last time, if you combine all of these principles, you can start mixing them up. And over time, you'll slowly observe you getting better and better at these mix-ups, using more efficient means to kill demons. The limitations are the low ammo, and for a lot of people this is a cripple. On top of that, if you want any sort of resource, you need to get it from an enemy, leading to you having to make room for that during the combat puzzles. Including all of these things doesn't mean a combat system is going to be amazing by default. You still need to do these three things well. Equally, for more casual experiences, taking power from the player, making things more random can also be really fun. Look at Mario Kart, that's unfair randomness incarnate and loads of people swear by it. So while these sort of games may seem like the gamer's game, there is a very broad landscape of games, just like I mentioned in my intro. But to conclude, successfully pulling off these three previously stated principles will likely lead to a fun and engaging combat system.